Welcome to the Freedom to Learn podcast. I'm your host, Ginny Gentles. This season, we're diving into what it means to return education to states, communities, and families. And we're exploring what becomes possible when education is freed from union dominance and federal control. A new report from the Defense of Freedom Institute entitled The Radicalism of Graduate Student Unions Affiliated with the Teachers Unions uncovered evidence that graduate student labor organizations are increasingly promoting radical political activism and anti-Semitism rather than focusing on traditional labor concerns such as wages, benefits, and working conditions. The author of the report, DFI Senior Fellow J.P. Greene, joins me today to discuss graduate labor organizations, the impacts of their radicalism on campus culture, and visa policies that contribute to the issues raised in his report. Many of our listeners will know Jay from his work in the education freedom field. He founded and led University of Arkansas's Department of Education Reform and previously held faculty appointments at the University of Texas at Austin and the University of Houston. Jay has authored or co-authored hundreds of peer-reviewed articles, policy reports, and opinion pieces on education reform, school choice, higher education governance, and anti-Semitism in education. Jay Greene, welcome to Freedom to Learn.
Thanks for having me on.
Your new report, The Radicalism of Graduate Student Unions Affiliated with the Teachers Unions, analyzes these GSOs, graduate student organizations, or what are they called?
No, they're graduate labor organizations.
Oh, GLOs, GLOs. Okay.
Right. These are not these are unions. They're not simply clubs. A lot of universities have clubs for graduate students to be part of. This is an actual labor union with collective bargaining rights and so on.
Right. So, okay, these are graduate student unions organized by the American Federation of Teachers, largely.
The unions always look for areas of expansion, and the teachers' unions particularly need to look for areas of expansion because their core business is shrinking. With a decline in fertility, K-12 enrollments is dropping. With that, the number of teachers employed will almost certainly shrink over time, pretty dramatically over time. And so the number of people they could potentially organize and collect dues from is also in decline. And so they need to expand into other industries. And they've been doing this for a little while. One of the main areas they've expanded into is healthcare. So they're organizing nurses and other allied health professionals,
Including Planned Parenthood workers in some places.
Right. Planned Parenthood, honestly, they'll probably take on most anyone, but that's where they see a lot of potential, correctly, because healthcare is a growing industry while K-12 is a shrinking industry. But another growing area that they've expanded into is higher education. And in particular, they've begun to organize the graduate students in higher education. Now, this is a strange thing because graduate students are temporary. They're only there for a little while and then they leave because they complete their degrees. And it's also extra strange because a very large chunk of graduate students are foreign. So labor organizations in the United States normally represent American workers. But in the case of graduate student unions, they're representing foreign workers who are temporarily residing in the United States.
This report looked into these higher education affiliates organized by the teachers' unions and found that they obsessively pursue political activism that is tightly connected to the agendas of foreign governments and movements.
They're bringing to their graduate education foreign agendas and foreign interests. They're often sponsored by foreign powers who are helping make it possible for them to attend university in the United States. Not surprisingly, the unions that represent them will represent these preferences. And so what we see are these graduate student unions are obsessed with politics as opposed to wages, benefits, and working conditions, which is what you might imagine unions would focus on. They're obsessed with political action, and they're particularly obsessed with foreign political action. And then within that, they're really obsessed with anti-Israel activity. So These have basically become vehicles for anti-Israel and anti-Semitic activism on campus by foreigners who are temporarily in the United States. And it's a dramatic departure from the history of organized labor in the United States. So very early on in organized labor, they were heavily infiltrated by international communist movements who were attempting to use American organized labor to advance global revolution for communism, right? They were advancing foreign radical interests through organized labor. But there were people who were opposed to that within unions, who wanted those unions to be focused on wages, benefits, and working conditions for American workers. And that was their preference. And there was a struggle within organized labor between these factions for control of organized labor. After World War II, it was clear to policymakers that this was a problem. And in 1947, they passed Taft-Hartley, which, among other provisions, addressed this problem by requiring that unions submit affidavits that none of their leaders were affiliated with the communist movement. Okay, and that provision, by the way, was upheld by the courts. This was a legal requirement. And the reason for it, just to be clear, is that unions are not merely associations. So this is not a question of, do communists have the freedom of association? Do they have the freedom of speech? They do. Communists can organize in the United States. Communists can speak in the United States. But unions are not merely associations that speak. They have special privileges. And those privileges are to bargain collectively, and to have grievances brought before federal bodies like the National Labor Relations Board. And in exchange for these privileges, they have to accept certain restrictions, which is how it was reasonable for them to not be associations that were advancing foreign interests. It was not in the interest of the United States to give this privileged status to foreign powers operating in the United States. And it worked. The unions purged their communist movements pretty effectively. And after Taft-Hartley, organized labor became pro-American and anti-communist. Fast forward to today, and we have the AFT sponsoring graduate student unions that are hurling anti-Semitic accusations that are anti-American and pro-communist.
This research went and through this methodically. You looked at 21 graduate student unions with current information on the internet.
I looked at how often they took public positions, or what type of public positions they took with respect to Israel, the conflict in Ukraine, and the conflict in Iran. I might reasonably expect that they would have nothing to say about any of these conflicts, which would be totally fine for an American labor union not to care about any of these things.
Right.
But as it turns out, 3/4 of them had, very active positions critical of Israel. And a very small percentage of them had taken any public positions with respect to Ukraine or Iran. A few more of them had positions on Iran, but they were actually divided, where half of them were favorable to the regime, or at least critical of any attempt to interfere with the regime,
Okay.
while half were sympathetic to the protesters.
So we'd want to distinguish between expressing an opinion on Israel and foreign policy, which again is kind of a strange thing to do for a graduate student union, and being anti-Semitic. So taking a position on Israel is not the same thing as an
Right.
anti-Semitic slur,
It
right?
is not. And so let me be clear, these unions didn't just take positions critical of Israel.
Okay.
They took hundreds of positions. This was an obsession. They talked far more about Israel than they talked about wages, benefits, and working conditions. This is what the unions were about. So when they did talk, when they rarely talked about Ukraine or Iran, they did so in one or two messages. They did so with sober language. But when speaking about Israel, it was hundreds of communications with incredibly intemperate language, and language that clearly crosses the line into being anti-Semitism. So So one can be critical of Israel or the actions of the Israeli government and not be anti-Semitic, but if you believe that Israel controls the United States through Jews, that is part of global colonialism, imperialism, and so on, you're beginning to cross the line into something that is hateful towards Jews, because it involves a conspiracy where Jews secretly control all of these events and are hoodwinking others into serving their interests. It isn't just the anti-Semitic and anti-Israel stuff; it's also the pro-communist stuff that is kind of shocking.
Yeah, and we wanna make sure that folks take a look at this report and take a look at some of the images that we've put in the report and have shared on social media, because 'cause you're not making that up at all. There's image after image of the raised fist, of the language like "Workers of the world unite." There's a very silly image of Marx in a car saying, "Get
In a
in, losers."
convertible. I mean, I didn't know that it seems so decadent and bourgeois for
Well, it's very
a
Mean Girls.
convertible.
Like, this was a reference to the Mean Girls movie, the Get In Losers. We're going to the
Oh,
mall is from that movie, and so then
right.
they put in Marx in the driver's seat instead of Regina George. Uh, so I look at that and I think, okay, do these kids know that they're peddling Marxism? Are they just cosplaying as communists? Is this fun for them or funny? Or is there or do they really understand what Marxism is, what communism is, what they're pushing?
I think a lot of it is cosplaying for sure. Some of it is enjoying the feeling of naughtiness, being transgressive, um, and some of it is just a glue that can help bring together people in their anti-Americanism and their anti-Semitism. Marxism helps with that.
Mm,
Um, uh, and so, and let me be clear, while I think the extremely high percentage of foreign students in represented by these unions is facilitating this radical obsession with anti-Americanism and anti-Israel activity, there's plenty of it also coming from domestic students, right? Native-born Americans also are joining in this, but frankly, it would be much less of an issue if it weren't dominated so heavily by foreigners. They are strengthening it and facilitating it in a very important way. Um, and this has to do with, why are there so many foreigners in U.S. graduate schools, which is, I think, another topic that is worth spending a little time on. So people don't understand that the appeal of graduate students to universities is that they're cheap workers.
mm,
Okay, they help run universities. They teach intro classes. They run the labs. They are the grape pickers of universities, the cheap labor who does all the work that's necessary for the university to function.
mm,
Um, and by the way, it makes me, mildly sympathetic to the idea that they might want to be represented by a union, because they have terrible pay and working conditions. If only they had a union that actually cared about that. It's not a very attractive job for native born Americans who have a lot of other better opportunities in their lives, and tend to go into things other than getting advanced degrees at American universities, because spending 6 years to get a PhD, living 6 to a house in some Somerville, rundown apartment is not very appealing to native-born Americans, but is very appealing to foreign students. And the reason why it's very appealing is not only because they tend to come from lower standards of living, but also because it's simply a way into the United States without restriction. So the number of F1 visas, that's the visa that allows foreigners to come and study at universities in the US, the number of F1 visas is uncapped. As many can come as universities want to admit. Um, and so over time, that number has risen dramatically, so that we now have more than 1 million students in the US with an F1 visa right now. And that's more than double what we had just when Obama was becoming president. It's just so attractive to universities to have this cheap labor, and very attractive to foreigners to figure out a way to end run immigration law and get into the US, because there's no vetting, as long as you can get accepted somewhere at a university, which isn't hard, um, and somehow have the resources to get here, you can do it. And then once you're in, you never have to leave. You're supposed to leave. You're supposed to swear when you get that F1 visa that when you finish, you're going to leave. But we offer people endless opportunities not to leave, and so they don't. So first, they can stay under the optional practical training program. And as long as they work in a field related to their studies, they're allowed to stay up to 3 years with on their F1 visa still under this OPT, optional practical training program, often at universities. Then there are H-1B visas available for postdocs and other lab tech and teaching assistant positions, or adjunct faculty positions. So universities, unlike for-profit corporations, have an unlimited number of H-1B visas that they can sponsor. There's no cap. Private corporations are capped at 85,000 a year. Universities can sponsor as many H-1B visas as they like, and they have a ton of these F1 visa holders who want to stay, and they're willing to take, frankly, low-paying, not great jobs to run things at universities, being the postdocs, being the lab techs, being adjunct faculty, and they get sponsored with H-1Bs.
Right, and
And
H-1B is 3 years, and then you can renew for another 3 years, so
it's 6, isn't it?
6 total.
Um, Maybe you've been in the US for 6 years to get your PhD on an F1. Then you have 3 more years on an OPT. Now you've been here 9 years. And then with an H-1B, add another 6. They want to come in and stay if they can. And some of them just want economic opportunities and enjoy the benefits of American life, which are numerous. But some of them are coming with political agendas. They're coming because they want to change America. There are things they don't like about America. There are things about how America behaves in the world that they would like to alter, to promote the interests of their home country. And they now have increasing opportunities to do this. They have the opportunity because when they work at universities, they teach the intro classes. So they're teaching your kids in the intro classes. They're running the labs.
At
So
the
they
large universities.
at large universities, right?
Yes, as a parent in the college search process right now, I'm assured by all the smaller universities that the classes will be taught by professors.
Well, but sometimes the professor is an adjunct professor there with an H-1B. So they're they move into academia at a very high rate, in part because academia has no limit on how many of them they can take.
Right.
Okay. And so a quarter of all faculty in the US are foreign born, right? Because this is
All
the path in.
faculty.
Yes, of faculty.
Okay, because you
Um,
also have in this report, you mentioned that of the larger universities that are more likely to have these graduate students working as teaching and research assistants, also a quarter, 27% of graduate enrollment consists of international students. So we're talking about a big chunk of the graduate enrollment and a big chunk of the faculty are foreign born. I just want to interject that we're a country that welcomes people from other countries. Immigration itself is not a bad thing. It can be a very good thing, and we have these legal processes in place. So we're not talking about people who are doing anything
no,
illegal.
no.
Right. Okay.
Uh, but and there are benefits to American education from having foreigners come. They're bringing talent. They bring different experiences from around the world that helps enrich the education for native-born Americans who have exposure to those people from around the world. But originally, the idea was that we'd bring in people from around the world who would learn American political values, the virtues of the American political system, and then bring them home to their countries. But instead, the educational exchange is going in the opposite direction, which is they're now coming, bringing their political values, bringing their political system, and then we're exposing our children at elite universities who will become the leaders of the American government, of American corporations. We're exposing them to the virtues of foreign political values and foreign political systems.
Yeah,
And
speaking of elite
so,
universities, you cite Brown, and
mm,
apparently foreign students with visas are more than 40% of graduate enrollment there. And the University of Michigan, 32% of graduate and professional students are there with student visas.
in the Ivy League, it's going to be between a third and a half
Okay.
of their graduate students will be foreign, um, and and the unions are representing those people and their interests clearly are obsessed with the concerns of foreign powers and criticism of Israel. And let me just give you a little feeling of this, just quoting from the head of the Brown Graduate Labor Organization, Sharina Rezik, who describes herself as, quote, a diasporic Palestinian feminist educator, scholar, activist, and labor organizer. And as president of GLOW, the Graduate Labor Organization, she championed what she said was, quote, the union's decision to focus on divestment as a political goal. So, I mean, it's not surprising. That's something she wants. But it's not really so much the wages, benefits, and working conditions that you might expect from a labor organizer. It's those other things that seem to take priority. A labor organizer was last in that list. And then, not surprisingly, they put together images like this, which is a document that reads, "Do not work for war, settler colonialism, and genocide." And it has images of tanks and says, "Shut down the imperialist war machine. Hands off Venezuela, Iran, and Cuba." And then, for good measure, throws in free Palestine, because why not? And then it says, "Fight fascism and stop the war on workers and our immigrant communities." So,
All
you
the
know,
things.
all the things except wages, benefits, and working conditions. And they all have logos with the raised fist, which is a communist symbol. Now, at the University of Michigan, the Graduate Employees Organization, um, they like calling upon their faculty to engage in violent struggle against Israel. So they have a post that they put up um, that shows an image of Edward Said, who was a professor at Columbia University, throwing rocks at Israel. And the message was, if you have tenure, what's stopping you? And then the Graduate Employees Organization adds, paging University of Michigan faculty with eyes to indicate that they should join. Um, now, again, people are allowed their political beliefs, and they're allowed to express them. American citizens, I should add, foreign citizens may have more limited political speech since they are here on visas with restrictions. So, for example, if you're a member of the Communist Party or allied with a terrorist organization, you're not allowed to receive a visa to enter the United States. You could be denied a visa, and that is not an infringement of the First Amendment. Foreign citizens seeking to enter the United States don't have a First Amendment right. And so, similarly, the belief is that if people were let in on those conditions, they could also be removed for the same conditions. They don't have the same speech rights. They're here as guests on temporary visas that have conditions and conditions not to engage in certain kinds of political activism that are contrary to American interests, since they were let into the country in order to serve certain American interests. They can be removed if they violate that.
There are more examples that you give in here that are beyond what we might think of activism, and just ludicrous language like referring to Turtle Island, back to Brown University, their labor organization, graduate labor organization, their Palestine Solidarity Caucus posted on Instagram, joining student groups from over 100 universities across Turtle Island, so-called United States and Canada, and went on to say what they were, what they were walking out to protest on. But coming to this country and then referring to it as Turtle Island, so-called United States.
Sure. University of Michigan's Graduate Employees Organization frequently promotes messages from the Tahrir Coalition, which describes itself as, quote, a movement dedicated to the liberation of all people. We advocate for resistance against systems of domination and struggle to destroy their manifestations at the University of Michigan, throughout Turtle Island, and across the globe. We act in solidarity with freedom fighters in Palestine and revolutionaries everywhere working to dismantle global imperialism, capitalism, white supremacy, and patriarchy. And I hope they also are opposed to tooth decay as well. I mean, it would be helpful if they could address our moral and oral decay.
This is a lengthy list: imperialism, capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy. Like, they're busy, these folks.
Busy, but not with wages, benefits, and working
I
conditions,
hear
which is
you.
what they've been recognized as unions for.
Right.
And so it would be reasonable for policymakers to reconsider.
Yeah, let's get to some solutions. We're talking about the language, we're talking about the images and the protests and the walkouts. And I do think it's important for people to hear about that, because we want to understand what we're talking about. This isn't just something that you've heard about. This is something that you've analyzed and you've gone through and shared this. And we do hope people will be concerned that these folks are referring to each other as comrades and
Yeah.
they're, and as revolutionaries. And maybe that's not a good thing. We're not saying that immigration is a bad thing. We're saying that these unions who have produced this and cultivated this kind of culture and activism, perhaps not a good thing. So what are some solutions to
Well,
address these
before
issues?
solutions, let me just probably try to anticipate. Our listeners might be thinking, well, college kids,
Right.
college kids do that. It's kind of harmless. When I was in college, we did divestment and we slept in a shanty and it was really cool. And, you know, um, and people have fond memories of their youthful protest, which makes them more indulgent of current protests. These are things that people remember romantically,
Mhm.
nostalgically, and they project it onto the current protests, the current students. And let me tell you, it's not the same. Like, this isn't your shanty town that these people are in. Um, uh, these are people who are organizing with real hostility against the United States and traditional American political values in a very serious way, fueled by foreign resources and people. This is a little bit more like Weather Underground, which also we shouldn't
Oh,
romanticize. I mean, those
no.
people blew people up and killed people, sometimes themselves, accidentally. And they weren't romantic figures at all. They were violent revolutionaries who lost badly, total losers. And these people are total losers too, but they're causing quite a bit of damage as they do it. They're poisoning our kids with crazy ideas that divert them from otherwise kind of productive adult lives that we might wish them to pursue. And they're undermining the intellectual integrity and productivity of our leading universities that are supposed to help develop new knowledge and advance our understanding of the world, our economy. This is all a giant distraction and subversion of those worthy goals of higher education. And so things that are good in small doses are dangerous at higher doses. So, foreign students on campus, good at a reasonable dose, bad at a really high dose. Similarly, Some campus activism and protest, good at a small dose, dangerous at a high dose. And I think that if we can't see the difference between the kind of innocuous small stuff and this much more dangerous big stuff, we're in trouble. Uh,
Mhm.
and that's why we do need solutions. And so we can now turn to discussing those. Just as policymakers after World War II recognized that unions were being hijacked for foreign purposes, um, I think that we could see graduate student unions as serving a similar dangerous function, and might wish to impose similar restrictions. So one thing we could do is require that they submit affidavits that they're not affiliated with radical foreign movements, just like we did in Taft-Hartley. It sends a signal about the direction that labor organizations should take, and that they should steer clear of embrace of radical foreign agendas.
And
And
you've got some suggestions around using funding as a lever as well.
the universities have to recognize these unions and do things to facilitate these unions. And these same universities are the recipients of very large amounts of taxpayer dollars and subsidies, directly or indirectly. We can condition receipt of some or all of those subsidies on not facilitating these kinds of radical foreign fueled graduate student unions. Or we might simply decide that we don't think it's permissible to organize large numbers of temporary foreign workers. We wouldn't want a union for tourists. Tourists enter the United States on tourism visas.
Mm.
They're here temporarily. It would be weird if we organized them as a labor union. I understand they don't have wages, and you know, but you understand the principle that, like, these are people here temporarily from somewhere else. It would be strange to give them special privileges for expressing their preferences. That would be a strange thing that maybe we want to figure out a way not to allow.
Well, and you've mentioned a couple times that some of these categories of visas are not limited within higher education. So are you proposing to do anything on that front?
In general, we need to make American universities American again, and not by eliminating foreign students and faculty, but simply by keeping the levels reasonable. And so placing caps on the percentage of F1 visas at universities is a totally sensible idea. Placing a cap on the number of H-1B visas that universities can sponsor seems eminently reasonable. Um, and these would limit the foreign influence over graduate student unions and the culture of the universities as a whole.
Any other advice that you have for people who are tackling this issue?
These are valued institutions that are major contributors to our society and our economy, and we can and should rescue them. And frankly, the vast majority of people who attend university and work at universities are normal, sensible people and don't want any of this stuff. They're suffering from all of this as much as anyone else, more so because they have to live with it every day. And we can help them, right? The trouble is they don't have the ability to stand up to bullies who are taking over their institutions. They're afraid of them with reason. And so we have to help the normies regain control of these institutions, because these these organizations are filled with normies, just like every other institution. The same is true for K-12 schools. The same is true for American politics in general. America is a good and decent place.
Well, Jay, normally I ask my guests to share how to find their work, but I can go ahead and say you can find it on dfipolicy.org. And how can they follow you specifically?
I'm on X, formerly known as Twitter, and my handle is at JAYP Greene, my last name with an E on the end, and that's my X handle. Yeah, and you can email me also, through DFI. You can find me and reach me if you have some thoughts or comments. Always eager to hear what people have to say.
Well, Jay, I look forward to future conversations on other topics, including education freedom, a field that you have worked in for a long, long time. And I want to thank you for your commitment to exposing unions, something that we regularly do at DFI.
Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Freedom to Learn is a production of the Defense of Freedom Institute. Learn more about our work at dfipolicy.org. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Send feedback, questions, and episode ideas to podcast@dfipolicy.org. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, please follow and review Freedom to Learn on your favorite podcast app and share it with a friend.